Well, my name is Rodney Klein, and I do EEO trainings for employers. And if you've seen me speak before, I've been doing this on my own for about a little bit over a year. And before that, I worked for the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for about 30 years. And I did outreach and education, this work, for about past 16 years. So I've been around a bit. So today they asked me to come talk to you about putting women on panels, right? What we're going to talk about today is, it's going to be a little bit different. My presentation. It's not going to be like your standard presentation, you know, where I come in and I say, here's the topic, here's what you need to know, and here's what you need to go out and do, and here's my contact information. That's not what we're going to do. What I hope to do instead is, because we're going to be talking about workplace behavior policies. Now, that is a much bigger conversation than we have time for in a single hour. So what I hope to do instead is kind of outline a conversation for you, or start a conversation for you that you can take back to your own organizations to have a much bigger conversation about workplace behavior policies. Now, to start off with, what we're going to talk about in order to kind of frame out this conversation is something called the good people myth, is what I've termed it. So what's the good people myth? All organizations run by a series of systems or policies or procedures, something that makes them work. Can we turn that? I think getting a little bit of feedback off of that. Thank you. And almost all of those systems at their center, they're based on a single premise. And that single premise is that these systems work because we have good people working the systems. That the decisions from the good people make those systems produce good results. And so when we talk about moving the needle on our systems, whether they're workplace behavior, which we're going to talk about today, or whether we're talking about hiring or evaluation or discipline, we almost always focus in on the individual. We say, hey, look, in order for our systems to be better, we just need to be better people. And we spend a lot of time talking about that, and that's good stuff. But it never seems to dawn on us that maybe the systems are making decisions for us. Maybe they're dictating to us what our decisions should be, and we're not even necessarily aware of it. So in order to illustrate this, let me tell you a story. When I was working at the EEOC, I did education and outreach. So I talked to employer groups. I also talked to groups of employees that tended to have EEO issues. And one of those groups was farm workers. So one of the things I did to kind of plug into the farm worker community was I was kind of attached to a national farm worker conference. I was on like a standing planning committee. So there's about 15 of us, and we would meet about 3 times a year, and we would do what planning committees do, right? What they probably did here, they pitch out topics, they think of presenters for those topics and panelists for those panels, and that's what we did. Also with me in that was a counterpart of mine. Her name was Deb. Now, if you've ever heard me speak before, you've heard me speak of Deb. We worked a lot together, and I learned a whole lot from Deb over the years. One of the reasons I learned from her is because Deb and I are 2 completely different people who respond to things in 2 completely different ways. So I always watched how Deb responded to see what I could learn from it. And this is one of these things that I learned. So Deb and I were on this committee for a while, and we both kind of made this sort of independent observation about the committee or about the panels and the presenters that we were bringing up, is that there was a real lack of diversity when it came to gender. Almost all the presenters and panelists were men. And so when we first got together and talked about this, you know, we do what most people do when you realize this for the first time. You're not so sure about it. Maybe it's an anomaly. Maybe it'll work itself out. And then one day it came to a glorious thud when I was asked to be on a panel, and the topic was issues impacting farm worker women. Now, I was pumped for that because I work for the EEOC. This is in my wheelhouse. I was excited. I wanted to do it. I said yes. So Deb and I walked over to the room, and my excitement went away when I walked into the door because I looked up to the front of the room, and what did I see? My fellow panelists, all 5 of my fellow panelists. And what common trait did we all share? Yes, we were all men. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. I was stuck. I had committed myself. So I slunked up to the front of the room, and I thought and I'm looking down the row of my fellow male panelists to discuss issues impacting women. And I thought, this could not possibly get any worse. And then I looked out into the audience, and what did I see? There was Deb in the back of the room with her phone, clicking photos and posting them to every social media account she had as fast as she could. In fact, before I got ready to do this morning, she sent me the photo of me sitting up there with my 5 male counterparts. So unfortunately, she only said it to me this morning, because the next presentation I'll actually have to put a photo of myself up there. So after this, we were like, okay, we have to have a conversation with the committee. So we did. So before the next planning meeting, we got the committee together and we talked to them, and we were very thoughtful and respectful, and we pointed out the problems, and we said, we got to do better with this. And they all agreed, because these are good people. These are advocates for farm workers. They're a little sensitive to these topics anyway, so this seemed like it ought to work. Except every day after we got done talking to them, what were the results? Male presenters, men on the panelists. I think we talked to them 3 times about this, and still we kept seeing the same results until one day. So we're all sitting around the conference table, and somebody pitched out an idea on the agenda, and so everybody's talking about who the presenters they want to be, or who the panelists are, and all the names that are being pitched out are men. And right in the middle of that conversation, Deb takes her hand and she slaps the table as hard as she can, and she says, how many times do I have to say this? Put some women on the damn panel. Now, for the sake of full disclosure, that's not exactly what Deb said. Let's just say it was in the spirit of what Deb said. It was like somebody dropped a lead weight in the middle of that conference room table. People were mad. They were mad. They were mad because they didn't say anything. But yet the remarks would come out. Oh, I got to know this topic. Oh, wait, I can't put that person. I need a woman, right? That kind of stuff. But you know what happened as the day went on? The conversations changed. Pretty soon we were hearing conversations like, you know what, I had a professor I heard talk about this, and she was really good. So I bet she'd be really excited to do this for us. And we started to see change. And so after that day was over, I thought to myself, what in the world did I just witness? Because these were good people. It should have worked. Talking to them should have worked. It wasn't until Deb kind of lowered the boom on people before they actually started changing. And I realized something that was real important. Is that people didn't change how they picked presenters and panelists until Deb made them so uncomfortable that they had to change their processes on how they picked presenters. Now, albeit it's a planning committee, so these processes are real informal. But what did they probably come down to for each individual? Who has done this for us in the past? Who's that going to be? Men. Who have I heard do this in the past? Well, men. And who do I know who might be a good subject matter expert and is used to speaking about this? Probably not as many men, but probably mostly men. It wasn't until Deb kind of made that discomfort palpable that they were forced to change. And I realized something, that when it comes to change in our organizations, that it's not good enough just to be good people. We need to be good people, and we need to continue to work on that. But if we don't also change the systems that we set up, that were set up years ago to give us bad results, they're going to keep giving us bad results as if on autopilot, regardless of how good we are. Okay. So we're going to be talking about workplace behavior policies. Let's take a look at this example. Tina is considered a rising star within the company. Her specialty is turning around underperforming manufacturing lines. 6 months ago, Tina was tasked with improving the performance of a manufacturing line that employs 500 line workers. And true to form, in 6 months, the line showed vast improvement in profitability. However, in the 6 months Tina ran the line, 20 employees filed harassment claims against the against managers and coworkers, and 25 other employees filed discrimination complaints regarding their discharges or some other terms and conditions of employment. These complaint numbers were significantly higher than normal. Now, an investigation revealed that when Tina took over management of the line, it employed 500 workers, 65% were white, 20% were Hispanic, and 15% were black. Now, at the end of Tina's first 6 months, that workforce changed. The racial makeup of the employees was 80% white, 11% Hispanic, and 9% black. All harassment and discrimination complaints were dismissed for lack of evidence. The HR director reported directly to Tina. 3 supervisors under Tina reported that when Tina came on board, she gave them a hit list of employees to fire or run off, and Tina rejected qualified black and Hispanic job candidates. So what happened? What did Tina do? What do you think? She turned around the line, right? But what did she also do? She used that as an opportunity to realign the racial and ethnic makeup of her staff. That's not good. So, what should the organization do with Tina? What do you think? If you were running that organization, what would you do with Tina? It's okay. Anyone? This is just hypothetical. Tina doesn't really exist here. One thought. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Discrimination training?
Training for Tina? What were you saying? Have a conversation with her, see if training might be helpful or maybe go some other route. What should the organization do with the workers who were harassed, fired, or run off? Theoretically.
It sounds like HR needs to be taken out from underneath Tina and put someplace else.
That's a good thought. Take HR out from underneath Tina. Perfect. But what should the organization do with those people that she impacted negatively or probably discriminated against?
Apologize and offer them their positions back.
Apologize and give them their positions back. With a pay increase. Ooh, I like the way you think. Now, in the real world, not in the hypothetical Tina world, but in the real world, what happens to Tina and the people she harmed? She gets a bonus, and then they move her somewhere else before this becomes a real issue. But what do they do with the people that she harmed? Nothing. Why? Because if you start helping those people, you're admitting negligence. Negligence means money. So we don't acknowledge that Tina even existed, right, in the real world. Now, why do we do this? Because that's the centerpiece of our workplace behavior policies, isn't it? What's the number one goal of our workplace behavior policies? To limit legal liability. Now, why is that? Because who do we ask to write our workplace behavior policies? Attorneys. Now, nothing against attorneys. We love our legal brothers and sisters. I'm sure they're good people in their own way. No, I mean, seriously, the attorneys aren't at fault here, right? Because attorneys at their core are risk managers. And what risk do we pay them to manage? Legal risk. So it makes sense that if they're going to write a policy for us, that one of the goals of that policy is going to be to limit legal liability. There's not a problem with that. But here's the problem. When limiting legal liability becomes the primary or sole goal of that policy, it comes with negative baggage. And that negative baggage may come out in comments like this. Well, we haven't been successfully sued this year. Oh, but our morale stinks, our productivity's down, our safety's awful, and all our talent is leaving. Not everything has a legal answer. Doing everything the law tells us to do may still leave us stuck in the mud. And I think that this is a good example because the policy is directed in the wrong place. So let me give you a cautionary tale on this. It involves the Houston Astros. Now, I don't really like calling people out publicly, but this presented itself as such a perfect example that I couldn't turn it down. So if you're an Astros fan, I'm sorry. You should really be a Rangers fan anyway, right? Okay, so I'm going to take you back a couple years, a few years now. Summer of 2019, Astros were really good. And in the summer of 2019, it looked like they were going to go pretty far. So the Astros made a trade to pick up a pitcher by the name of Roberto Osuna. Now, Roberto Osuna was considered a really good pitcher, but they got him from the Toronto Blue Jays for practically nothing. The Blue Jays wanted to get rid of this guy. So why would the Toronto Blue Jays want to get rid of a really good pitcher? Simple. He had been accused of assaulting the mother of his child. There were never criminal indictment made on him, but Major League Baseball did its own investigation and determined that the allegations were credible enough that they gave him a 75-game suspension, one of the longest they've ever given. So the Blue Jays were like, we don't want this guy. Astros said, we don't have a problem with that. Let's bring him on board. Okay, this is 2019. So now we're in fall of 2019. For those of you who don't follow baseball, let me just give you a quick primer. In baseball, there are two leagues, the American League and the National League. And at the end of the season, they have tournaments. And the winner of their tournaments play each other in the World Series. The Astros were playing the Yankees to see which team would go to the World Series. And guess what? The Astros won. So you can imagine that there's this sort of wild celebration going on in the clubhouse after the game. You've got players, you've got management officials, you've got staff, you've got reporters, you've got members of the public. And one of the people there is a guy by the name of Brandon Taubman. And Brandon Taubman is an assistant general manager with the Houston Astros. He went up to a group of female reporters and he shouted at them up to 6 times, "Thank God we got Osuna. I'm so blanking glad we got Osuna." Now, one of the women had a domestic violence wristband on, something you need to know. So you would think that Roberto Osuna did something really great to win the game. Why else would he be cheering for Osuna? Osuna almost lost the game for him. He gave up a game-tying run late in the game. The Astros actually had to come back. So Osuna was not to be cheered for this game. He specifically targeted those women. So 2 days later, on October 21st, Stephanie Apstein, who was a reporter with Sports Illustrated, wrote about the incident because she was also there. She was one of the women that he targeted. Now, before she posted her article, she asked the Astros for comment, and they never responded to her. They refused to respond. But just 1 hour after she posted her article, the Astros said, "The story posted by Sports Illustrated is misleading and completely irresponsible. We are extremely disappointed in Sports Illustrated's attempt to fabricate a story where one does not exist." They just called Stephanie Apstein a liar to the entire world. Okay. Now, Stephanie Apstein doesn't work for the Astros. But this is going to play out an awful lot like an internal complaint of harassment or workplace behavior. Now, we said, what's the number one goal of workplace behavior policies? To limit legal liability. So what Stephanie Apstein did is she complained, which is the centerpiece of all of our workplace behavior policies, is the complaint procedure. What's the number one goal of most complaint procedures? To discourage complaints. And you know what? It works. Do you know that 70% of employees who feel like they've been harassed never report it to their employers? 70%. What do you think the number one reason is? Retaliation, fear of retaliation. Do you think being called a liar in front of the entire world might discourage people from making or supporting a complaint of workplace behavior? I think so. Now, why did the Astros do this? Are they bad people? What do you think? Why do you think they were motivated to go this route? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Yeah, go ahead.
To save their reputation.
To save their reputation, yeah, or to back this up, right? In other words, go back to that premise that the goal is to limit legal liability. That reputation thing is all tied into that. So what do we do when somebody makes a complaint? We circle the wagons. And what's the script say? Because I think they did this not necessarily because they're bad people. I think they're following the script. We know what the script is. Workplace behavior policies have the script written into them. First thing we do is circle the wagons, and we deny. That creates an automatic antagonistic relationship with the person that made the complaint. Deny, deny, deny. Now, here's something to keep in mind. Stephanie Apstein didn't write this story from a source. She was there. So when the Astros told her that she didn't see what she saw and she didn't hear what she heard, what societal narrative about women are they tapping into? That women are not reliable narrators of their own stories. Comes out right away. Now, here's a tip. If you're going to deny an alleged thing happened, it's probably a good idea that it didn't happen in front of a whole room full of people who don't work for you. Because the next day, what happened? Oh, everybody's going, yeah, I was there. That happened. So since they couldn't deny it anymore, what's the script say now? First we deny, and well, if we can't deny, what do? Spin. So they put Brandon Taubman out there. And what did Taubman do? He released a statement and he said he was deeply sorry and embarrassed for using inappropriate language. He did not admit to targeting the women. He said his overexuberance in support of a player has been misinterpreted. I am sorry if anyone was offended by my actions. The non-apology apology. Right? Oh, and then after that, Jim Crane, owner of the Astros, came out and talked about all of the stuff that the Astros have done to support victims of domestic violence. What was Jim Crane basically saying? We are good people. So this couldn't have possibly happened because we're good people. Now, we talked about societal narratives. So when Taubman writes that my overexuberance in support of a player has been misinterpreted, what societal narrative is he playing out about women? What societal narrative's there? Yeah, women, they're just too sensitive. That's what he's saying, right? Yeah, I did it, but, it's being misinterpreted. Here's the thing, though. Game 1 of the World Series is that night. Here's a problem. World Series is the pinnacle event for baseball. It is when the eyes of the entire sports world are focused on baseball. It is a celebration of all things baseball. But nobody's talking about baseball. They're talking about this. That's not making Major League Baseball real happy. So the next day, Major League Baseball said, yeah, we're going to do our own investigation. Bam, Brandon Taubman's fired. Wow, is that predictable? Is that the script? First you deny, then you spin, and then you do what? Isolate. Isolate. Now, this is the flip side to the good people myth. Because if we say our policies work because we have good people running them, so if we have something bad that happens, it must be because that's a bad person. So we isolate the bad person, and we get rid of the bad person, and so nobody's looking at us. There's a fundamental problem with that. Studies show that it's not characteristics of an individual that determines whether harassment takes place at work. It's the characteristics of the organization. In other words, Brandon Taubman didn't harass those women because he's a bad person. Brandon Taubman harassed those women because he thought the Astros gave him license to do it. What's the ramifications of that? That means that every single incident of workplace behavior is systemic. is cultural. But we never look at behavior that way, do we? Think about it. When we talk to our employees about behavior, what do? We bring them in, we set them down, and we say, this is what we want you to do. This is what we don't want you to do. This is what's going to happen to you if you do what we tell you not to do. And then if a complaint's made and an investigation's done, what is that complaint focused on? Just the individual behavior, not what the organization did to create the culture that allowed that behavior to come out or to think that that was acceptable behavior. You see that this script, that the system is taking us off in directions that are completely unhelpful here. So, after they fired Taubman, they released a statement that said, our initial investigation, what initial investigation? Our initial investigation led us to believe that Brandon Taubman's inappropriate comments were not directed toward any reporter. We were wrong. We sincerely apologize to Stephanie Epstein. So how are they portraying themselves? We're as big of victims as the women are because Brandon Taubman's a bad person, right? Now, they apologized to Stephanie Epstein, but they called her a liar. They accused her of journalistic malpractice, which is a pretty big deal for a journalist. She asked for a retraction. They did not give her a retraction. So is this going away? No. The very next day, because this isn't going away, Jeff Luhnow, president of baseball operations for the Astros, had his own press conference, and he said, what? There were a lot of people involved in reviewing it, their initial statement, looking at it, approving it. This is not something that's endemic. This is not a cultural issue. We have a lot of really good people in our front office, in our coaching staff, and on our team. They're embracing that script. They're embracing that good people myth. Now, he was asked if he had apologized to any of the women involved. He said no because of his heavy travel schedule. But you know, Stephanie Epstein was actually in the audience as one of the press when he was saying this. Where's the owner? He's not there anymore. This is a rule of scapegoating. If Brandon Taubman being scapegoated doesn't do it, Jeff Luhnow's next on the list. The owner certainly isn't going to step up. This is a lack of moral integrity by the ownership. We're letting somebody else in management take the fall for this. This still doesn't go away. So finally, 2 days later, Jim Crane, the owner, finally released a statement and said, on behalf of the entire Astros organization, I want to personally apologize for the statement we issued on Monday. We were wrong, and I'm sorry that we initially questioned your professionalism. We retract the statement, and I assure you that the Houston Astros will learn from this experience. Now, honestly, do you think that Brandon Taubman, Jeff Luhnow, and Jim Crane really believed that they perpetuated a culture that were hostile towards women? Do you think they believe that? No, they think they're what? Good people, right? Now, after all this is over, maybe about a week or so later, Hannah Kaiser from Yahoo Sports, who was one of the women targeted by Taubman, she wrote her own article on this. And I can't think of a better summary. I know this is a little wordy, but I can't think of a better summary for this. I think she just hits this right on the head. She says, it's not hyperbolic to suggest that if the Astros front office were actually committed to using our voice to create awareness and support on the issue of domestic violence, that they would have welcomed reports and corroboration that someone in their employee did not reflect those values. They would want to know if and why journalists might not feel comfortable in their clubhouse. She goes on to say, much of what Luhnow said on Thursday attempts to perpetuate the convenient delusion that what happened at the American League Championship Series was just a standalone incident and not the sobering tip of an iceberg. Truth. And yet, why should the public believe that when the team has repeatedly demonstrated this week precisely why someone who is made to feel uncomfortable in their clubhouse wouldn't usually come forward on her own? They successfully telegraphed to anyone made uncomfortable in that clubhouse in the future that you'll need a small army of witnesses, the attention of the entire country, and a Major League Baseball investigation to be believed. I couldn't have said it better myself. That is truth. Okay? This is what happens when we allow the systems to think for us. I'm assuming that there are good people within the Astros organization, that Jeff Lunau was not lying when he said that. But yet, here's what happened. This is a cautionary tale, simply because, in my opinion, what they did was they just followed their workplace behavior policies and the convenient scripts that they had to cover themselves, to cover the reputational part. So how do we manage workplace behavior systemically? What do we say the number one priority of workplace behavior policies is? To limit legal liability. The number one goal of most complaint procedures is to keep people from complaining or discourage complaints, and they do work. So let's just have a real short conversation about what happened here. So what happened to the women involved after the process was over? What had happened to them during this whole time? From the time that Stephanie Apstein wrote her, from the time that Brandon Taubman did what he did, to the time that Jim Crane released his final statement, what had happened to them? Discredited. Basically, they were run over. If I were to summarize all of what happened to them, they were just run over. They were steamrolled. They were certainly discouraged from coming forward. And they were using what happened to them to discourage other people from coming forward. What happened to the men in this? What happened to Taubman and Lunau and Crane? They ended up having an egg on their face. Well, Taubman got fired. The other two, talk about reputation, well, it's worse now. They're kind of stained with this. Do you think anybody likes the outcome? Is that kind of standard in your organization when somebody makes a complaint? I did EEO investigations for 7 years, I guess. It's very rare that at the end of that process, anyone is happy, no matter what the outcome is. Is that kind of your experience too? If that's your experience, then we're not really getting the right things out of this, are we? Maybe we're limiting legal liability, but we're not really getting to the crux of what we're trying to get to. Do you think anything changed at the Astros? What is your opinion about that? You think anything changed?
I think they became more careful.
Careful, but not necessarily perpetuating a better culture? I think most people would probably come to, I don't know, but I would sort of assume the same thing. So how do we craft a different plan, a different process, a different system? Let me ask you this, what should the number one goal of our behavior policies be? What would you like to see? It's okay, you can say the obvious. That people behave. Behave well, right? Then when we talk about good workplace behavior, we really want to encourage workplace behavior. That should be the number one goal, is that people be able to work in an environment that's productive and efficient and effective, right? I've been saying this for quite a while, and that is, these days, I think workplace behavior is not so much about the law and limiting liability as much as it is the first step in recruitment. I don't know if you've noticed, there's a tight labor market out there. People are looking for good employment experiences. Where are they going to find that out first? How people are treated at work. Workplace behavior policies, in my opinion, for whatever that's worth, to help maybe start this conversation, my opinion is about attracting, developing, and keeping talent. I know recruitment is not a word we typically associate with behavior at work, but I really do think should be the number one goal of our workplace behavior policies, is attracting, developing, and keeping talent. Now, what am I doing for the rest of this time? I'm going to pitch out some ideas for you, I don't know that there's one system that works, but I'm going to throw out maybe some principles to think about. So as you're thinking about how you want to have these conversations at work, maybe you want to incorporate some of these things. The first thing is the recognition in our policies that all behavior problems are systemic and cultural in nature. What this means is the emphasis isn't necessarily on the complaints and the legality process. The emphasis is on things like what proactive steps are we taking to help managers implement those good cultures, to create good culture, to create good community, to create trust between management and staff. What are we doing proactively for that? So the policy isn't just reactive from a legal sense, it's proactive. Our investigations, when things come up, shouldn't just focus in on the incidents themselves. They should also ask those bigger questions. What sort of cultural failures did we have that led this individual to believe that this was acceptable behavior? And remember that our systems are vertical. We almost always throw these things at first-line managers because that's where culture starts. I mean, I get that. But, it's hard to be a first-line manager. The more verticality we can make in that. This is not just about staff. It's not just about first-line management. It's about department heads. It's about upper managers as well. Everybody should be involved in this. Number two, the focus is not on whether management did anything wrong. Why? Because that's a legal discussion. Wrong is another word for negligence. So that's why we always talk as, I didn't do anything wrong. From an organizational standpoint, I don't care if you didn't do anything wrong. I want to know what you did right. That's leadership. What did they do before the alleged incident happened? And what have they done after the alleged incident happened? The complaint itself is neither a positive or negative score. We almost always judge managers on, well, how many complaints did you have? That's not the point. You want complaints. 0 complaints is not the goal. You want a trusted complaint process. How do we know it's trusted? People are using it. Because when you have people working together, there's always going to be issues. So are people using that process? Evaluation methods on management officials should incorporate that stuff. What are they doing from a team building standpoint for recognizing what developing issues are happening within their teams, for setting that bar for behavior in their teams and meaning it, keeping that bar there. Following up areas for improvement and constructive reaction. Follow up with the employees. Don't wait for the employees to come to the managers. Managers should be doing what? Asking, how's things going today? Anything I need to know about? What's keeping you from being able to get our jobs done today? I want to know so I can help fix it. That should be part of their evaluation method. Number 3. Before I get to number 3. Because I'm talking about management, of course, I'm talking about all management. All management needs to develop culture. We know this. Culture doesn't happen unless it starts at the top. It's not to shove all this stuff down on first-line managers. It's to help create culture from within the organization. Everybody has to buy in on this for it to work. Which brings us to 3, which is something I thought of I wouldn't even put in here because I think the chances of you getting this done are practically non-existent. But I thought, what the heck, I'm going to throw this out here for you, and maybe in your conversations you might be able to get something done here. Number 3, the principle is the higher the position, the greater the responsibility for creating and maintaining systems and culture that reinforce good behavior and address bad behavior. What? In other words, if the first-line manager is this responsible, the upper manager is this responsible. I learned a long time ago, if you want to make something important to people, you make it important to their boss first. This has to be important to upper management. Now, I say good luck on this because talking upper managers into accepting accountability and responsibility is not something that's probably going to go well for you. People generally don't want to take on that kind of accountability voluntarily. I get that. But if you can integrate any level of verticality in your policies, then that's going to be helpful to the first-line managers. Because it really stinks to be a first-line manager and have a department head who's creating a toxic culture. Something goes wrong, and the first-line manager is scapegoated for it. There's got to be some degree of verticality in this. Number 4, must connect the behavior to group or team results. I think for the most part, we always see workplace behavior goals as something separate and distinct from everything else, right? If you're a team, you got a department, here's your department goals. Oh, and here's your workplace behavior goals. And they're two separate things. They're not separate, they're the same thing. In order to get this done, you need good behavior. They go hand in hand. What did we say the number one goal is? Attracting, developing, and keeping talent. It's not enough just to achieve your department goals. You got to bring people with you. That's leadership. That's developing people. That's giving people a good workplace experience. So it's part of the manager's responsibility on not just achieving those external goals, but how are they bringing their staff with them? Why is this important? Probably all heard about psychological safety. We're going to talk a little bit about that. If you haven't, Google did some work in psychological safety. They called it Project Aristotle. And what they did was they tried to figure out what makes teams effective. So they tried all kinds of things, right? They put together teams that were highly structured, and they put together teams that didn't have any structure at all. They put together teams where everybody in the team knew each other socially, and then they put together teams where nobody knew each other socially. And what did they find? None of that stuff mattered. The only thing that seemed to matter was this thing called psychological safety. The idea that you're not going to be punished for making a mistake. Now, don't hear that wrong. That doesn't mean we've done away with personal accountability. We're all still personally accountable for the work we do and the work we don't do. I'm talking about within the framework of the team. That if we're working together in a team, I can pitch out an idea and I don't have to worry about getting crushed. Or I can bring up issues within the team and I don't have to worry about being ostracized or isolated. That's what that means. Why is this important? Because the idea here is that if we have a team made up of a group of individuals, the most effective and most efficient teams happen when everybody is equally participating. The best ideas don't come from individuals. The best ideas are collaborative. In order to get that collaboration, we need everybody participating. But what tends to happen is if I'm the team leader, I walk in and I just kind of start telling people what to do. Well, that's just me making decisions. I'm not getting the most out of my team. Or what I think happens most of the time is I'm the team leader and I walk in and I get like 1 or 2 people who participate and nobody else does. I'm still not getting the most out of my teams. You need that psychological safety because what this looks like is, like if you and I are on a team and I'm pitching you my idea and I can tell by the look on your face that you think that's the dumbest idea you've ever heard, I'm not waiting for you to respond. I'm wanting you to respond. I finish by saying, I can tell you think that I'm missing something. What am I missing? And I'm pitching that back to you in a way that allows you to participate. Get you to come out. That's what that psychological safety is. What I'm not talking about here is creating an environment where everybody agrees with one another and everybody's happy. No, in fact, I'm talking about the exact opposite. Creating an environment where everybody can disagree. Because those disagreements are the things that drive organizations forward. It gets you the best ideas. Because you and I are working on something, and I'm pitching an idea, and you're pitching an idea, and we keep doing that till we come up with the best idea. But the second our disagreement becomes personal, it's no longer about coming up with the best idea, is it? It's about winning. Oh, I'm going to get my way. Because I don't want you getting your way. That's how that works. Psychological safety is important for that. Keeping those relationships clean help. You cannot have psychological safety in a team where there's a behavior issue. You can't. That's what makes workplace behavior directly tied to our team goals. It's an integral part. It's not a separate part. It's all one and the same. So, of course, number 5 means These goals must reinforce psychological safety. The goal is not to keep that peace, but to get the most out of our people. Anybody within that team who feels isolated from the rest of the team, you're not getting the most out of them. That should be the goal of that manager, is a team leader, to keep everybody engaged equally. That should be how they're evaluated. Number 6, must ID employees' skills and imperfections and place employee in a position to succeed and develop. Why? Because what's workplace behavior about? Attracting, developing, and keeping talent. That means when people come on board, we got to do something with them. We got to find out what they're good at, and we got to find out what they're not so good at. We got to put them in positions to succeed, and we got to work on their deficiencies. I had a supervisor years ago, and he'd always say this, and it always made me laugh, because he was talking about teams, and he goes, "Rodney, you can't have a team with 5 David Robinsons," which should tell you how long ago that was, right? Because David Robinson's like my age. And by the way, if you don't know who David Robinson was, he was a really good basketball player. And I always laughed at it because it was kind of a silly thing to say, but it was absolutely true. We can't have a team with 5 stars. Managers all want that. They want David Robinsons on their team, and they're not satisfied if they don't. They want to run those people off who aren't. But that's not how the world works. We're all kind of imperfect. We need to bring people in, find out what they're good at, put them into positions where they can be successful, but we also need to work on what they don't do well. It's about development. It's about bringing people along. It's about giving people that good employment experience. We need to help our people grow. That's part of workplace behavior. By the way, I actually walked up here without my phone and have no idea how close I am on time. 10 till. Oh, not bad. So the problem with standing still, we've talked about the pandemic. Labor markets are tight. Workplace behavior is about recruitment. Are we giving our people reasons to stay by giving them a good employment experience that's directly tied to good workplace behavior? I think you probably all had a lot of training on the Texas Labor Code change because this becomes directly accountable. We might actually be sued ourselves for sexual harassment claims, not just the organization. So I'm not going to go over that with you. But what I have basically done is outlined a conversation for you that you might see as a no-win situation. Right? Klein just proposed that I go to senior management and I roll out this thing that makes them commit to fundamental and somewhat difficult change. It's not going to work. I'm going to lose that discussion. Yeah, you might, right? I mean, I think it's probable. And the reason I think that is, let me get philosophical with you for a second. I've learned a lot of things working in EEO field for 30 plus years. And one of the things I learned, just in observation, is that on human nature, is that if you've been alive on this planet any length of time at all, you've suffered. We've all suffered. Now, you can make the argument that some people suffer more intensely and longer than others, but we have all been there, so we all know what it feels like. So you would think, since we all know what that's like, that we would be sympathetic to the suffering of others, that we would do what we could to try to alleviate that suffering whenever we can. But I found we don't really do that. We're very interested in our own sufferings, but we're not so much interested in the sufferings of other people. Where am I going with this? The natural instinct for upper managers, when we start talking about workplace behavior that happens on the first line, because that's so far away from them, their first response is to do what? Mitigate. Mitigate, mitigate, mitigate. Do they deal with it? No. They don't want to deal with it. Why? Because dealing with it may cause them a fuss. Mitigating it means they never see it. So it's hard to convince people whose natural impulse is to mitigate that they need to embrace something that's going to make them more directly involved in this. I understand that. Do I have a real good argument for how you get around that? No. But here's what I will say. Have the conversation anyway. Because if you don't have it, who is? HR is in a very unique position within an organization. You're tied to management, but you're also tied to the people who do the work. You're the conduit between the two. If you don't tell upper management how this works, they'll never know how. They're not going to hear this from anyone else. I always thought when I worked for somebody, it was my job to tell them what I thought. I wasn't serving them properly. I wasn't serving the organization properly if I didn't tell them what I thought. Now, it was their job to do with that information what they wanted, but it was my job to tell them. What that meant was I won some and I lost some, but I kept having those conversations. Eventually, if you keep having this conversation, the truth of it's going to, and the necessity of it's going to ring. Because I'll say this, I've been doing this for 30 years. I honestly believe now, more than any time in the past 30 years that I've been doing this work, we need leaders to emerge from human resources. With as stressed as people are, with as angry as people are, with as fractured as people are, it's you in human resources that will be able to help those employees and help those organizations and help those managers get through this time. Leadership must come from human resources. Now more than any other time that I've seen in the past 30 years. You are in a unique spot, not a comfortable one, but a unique one. I would encourage you to keep having these type of conversations, bringing them up. Why? Because we all have obligations towards each other. We do. To fully meet those obligations, we have to recognize that some of the systems we're using might be leading us in the wrong direction. They don't work like we want them to work. Change requires not just personal responsibility, being a good person, but it requires changing those systems. And change isn't easy. It's hard. It requires will. It requires repetition. It's always resisted. It only happens, like when Deb, right? When people realize that when people recognize the moral necessity for it, or they become too uncomfortable to stay in their original place. And it only happens if leaders drive it, which is you. So I wish you the best of luck in these conversations. I hope you have them. Here's my contact information. If I can help you in this conversation, let me know. Give you ideas, walk you through things, tell you what I've observed to help you do this within your organizations. I also do EEO training, so if you all, whether that's legal compliance with managers or some of the behavior stuff that we talked about today or unconscious bias, I do a lot of different things. If any of that's of interest to you, there's my contact information. Send me an email, give me a phone call. So there's all your recertification credit. I'll be sticking around here for a little bit. If anybody has any questions or want to talk more about it, look me up. Otherwise, thank you so much for your patience, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.